German female POWs mocked the Americans' obsession with hygiene and laughed even harder when they saw the soldiers carefully unwrapping a simple bar of soap. But their laughter died the moment they brought it to their noses. The sweet, unfamiliar fragrance stopped them cold. It wasn't the harsh, gray, carbolic stench of wartime Europe. It was soft, floral, almost edible. For the first time, these women, once loyal to the Reich, felt something unexpected: shame and wonder. How could a bar of soap smell like hope? It happened in the final months of World War II, in a makeshift POW camp deep in the ruins of Germany. Food was scarce, dignity scarcer, and yet the Americans still washed. The German women whispered to each other that American soap was made from luxury, from arrogance. They were wrong. That bar carried a secret, a story stretching back across the Atlantic, through ration lines, factory shifts, and the hearts of women who'd never seen the front lines, but still fought their own war. And when the truth came out, the POS would never see the world, or themselves, the same way again. The camp of silent snow fell like ash over the ruins of Bavaria, coating the broken stone of a captured munitions plant now ringed with barbed wire. It was February 1945, and the war was breathing its last, though no one inside the camp believed in endings anymore. The sky was gray, the ground was gray. Even the faces of the prisoners seemed drained of color, except for the faint red on their cheeks from the cold. Hildmeyer walked with her head down, boots crunching through slush, hands tucked deep into her threadbare coat. She had been a nurse for the Wehrmacht, though no one cared now. She was just another German prisoner, one of hundreds of women rounded up when the front collapsed. The Americans called them auxiliaries, but the word felt like a disguise for something worse. Inside the camp, silence ruled. No shouting, no singing, no cries of command. Only the steady hum of the generator and the cough of diesel trucks. The women whispered among themselves about their lost homes, their vanished brothers, the fate that awaited them. But what puzzled them most were the Americans themselves. They were nothing like the monsters the radio had described. They laughed too icily. They shared cigarettes. They even apologized when bumping into prisoners. And every evening after supper, they did something utterly bizarre. They washed. Buckets of steaming water appeared from the kitchen. Towels were hung on wires. And one by one, the soldiers took turns scrubbing their faces, hands, even their boots. They rubbed small white bars against their skin, creating foam that carried a faint, impossible scent, sweet, almost warm, like spring dot. At first, the women mocked them. "Look at them," one said, huddled near the stove. "Afraid of dirt. They think they can wash away the war." Another added, "That's what happens when you have too much comfort. No discipline." Laughter rippled quietly, brittle as frost. But Hild didn't laugh. The smell drifted across the campyard one night, faint, almost lost in the smoke of burning wood, and it caught her by the throat. She couldn't name it. It wasn't the sharp bite of disinfectant, nor the sour lye soap they'd been issued back home. It smelled human, alive. The next day, an American guard, tall, maybe 25, with a soft drawl, noticed her staring at the washing station. He smiled, reached into his pack, and tossed something underhand, a bar wrapped in wax paper. She froze. He just nodded once and walked away. The German women gasped. "He's mocking you," one hissed. "They make fun of us, like we stink." But Hild knelt slowly, picked up the bar and turned it in her hands. It was smooth, clean, embossed with a brand she didn't recognize. Ivory, that night. She unwrapped it in the shadows of her bunk. The paper crackled like old leaves. When the air touched it, the scent bloomed, faint but stubborn, like something refusing to die. She held it close to her face and inhaled. Sweetness, light, home, not her home, but someone's. For the first time since the surrender, she cried, quietly, bitterly, as though the smell itself had loosened something she'd buried. She hid the soap beneath her mattress, unwrapping it only when no one watched. She washed her hands secretly, rationing each use like a prayer. And each time, her mind wandered to the women who had once held this same bar. American women in bright kitchens, factory aprons tied around their waists, laughter echoing under electric lights. One morning, she noticed something strange. The other women had stopped laughing. The Americans had begun to share more: blankets, soup, even old magazines. And with each act of quiet generosity, something in the camp shifted. The women still whispered, but the edge of mockery was gone. Until one evening, when an older woman named Greta found Hild's soap. She held it up before the others like a captured secret. "So," she sneered, "our nurse has fallen in love with Yankee perfume." The others stared, some with scorn, others with hunger. Hild didn't answer. She reached out, took the bar back gently, and said, "It's not perfume. Clean." The word hung in the air like something dangerous. That night, Greta sat awake. She couldn't stop thinking of that smell, how it lingered even after the wind shifted. The next morning, when the Americans passed by with their buckets, she didn't look away. Soon, more women began asking for soap, at first timidly, then boldly. The guards laughed, but they gave it. They didn't understand what it meant. How, in a place where everything had turned gray, that small white bar became a spark. But not all welcomed the change. One evening, a group of prisoners refused to line up for food. "We are not beggars," their leader said coldly. "We don't need their charity." Her name was Lot, once a loyal secretary in the propaganda ministry. She still clung to her uniform collar, still believed that pride was all they had left. She pointed to Hild's hands, pale and scrubbed clean. "You think you're free because you smell like them." Hild looked at her, and for the first time, she didn't feel small. "No," she said softly, "because I don't smell like fear anymore." Lot's face twisted. She turned away, muttering that Hildy was a traitor, but her words sounded hollow, even to herself. That night, snow began to fall again, thicker, quieter. The camp generator sputtered and died, plunging everything into silence. From somewhere near the barracks, a single cough echoed, then another. The women huddled under thin blankets, shivering. Hild reached beneath her mattress, broke the soap in two, and handed half to Greta. "For tomorrow," she whispered. For after the snow, hours later, the sound of engines shattered the stillness. Trucks, orders, shouted in English. Then, unfamiliar voices, British. The women peered through the cracks in the wall. New uniforms. Different flags. "Transfer," a guard said gruffly. "Some of you are being moved to where no one knew." But Hild's stomach clenched. Change in this place was never simple. As dawn broke, she tucked the last sliver of soap into her coat pocket. The wind carried that faint sweetness again, mixing with the smell of diesel and smoke. She looked toward the horizon east, where home had once been, and felt a strange pull in her chest. Behind her, Greta whispered, "It smells like spring." Hild didn't answer. The trucks were waiting, engines growling like distant thunder. She took one last breath of that fragile scent and stepped forward into the unknown. The snow fell harder. The air thickened, and somewhere deep inside her pocket, the soap's fragrance still lingered, a reminder that even in captivity, something pure had survived. But as the convoy rolled out and the gates clanged shut, Hild saw something she couldn't understand. An American officer staring at her with a look not of pity but of sorrow, as if he knew something she didn't, something that would change everything when she found out. The smell of civilization. The road wound through what had once been Germany, now just rubble and silence, stitched together by the sound of engines. The convoy moved under a gray dawn, headlights slicing through mist. Hild sat on the wooden bed of a truck, pressed between Greta and a younger girl named Ilsa, who still clutched a bundle of papers as if they were treasure. The cold was sharper now, biting through coats, but no one complained. It was as if words had frozen too. The truck jolted to a stop hours later. Ahead stood another camp, larger, neater, with fences newly built. Wooden barracks lined in rows, an American flag snapping in the wind. Hild's stomach tightened as the guards signaled them down. This one didn't smell of diesel or rust. It smelled clean. There was that faint sweetness again. Soap, disinfectant, order. Inside, they were assigned bunks and bread, warm broth, even coffee, real coffee. It felt like blasphemy. Hilde sipped it slowly, eyes darting to the guards, who laughed with each other as if the war were something far away. She wondered how people could still laugh when so much of the world lay in ashes that night. When lights went out, Greta whispered, "Maybe they aren't monsters after all." Her voice trembled, not from fear, but something unfamiliar. Hope Hilde didn't answer. She turned her face toward the wooden wall, feeling the lump of soap still in her pocket. Days blurred into a strange rhythm. Inspections, meals, silence. The Americans rarely raised their voices. One morning, as snow melted into mud, an officer walked through the yard with a clipboard. His name, they learned, was Lieutenant Harris. He spoke fluent German, polite but firm. When he passed Hild, he hesitated. "You were a nurse," he said quietly. She nodded. "We may have use for you in the infirmary." That evening, she reported to the small clinic inside the camp. The room was warm, smelling of iodine and soap, the same kind. On a table lay a wounded German soldier, barely more than a boy. An American medic guided her. "We don't have much staff," he said. "You help, Ja." She did. Her hands remembered their purpose. Bandages, antiseptic, patience. As she worked, she saw the soap again, cut into neat squares, placed by every sink. Ivory, stamped bold and simple. She touched it once, and it felt like holding a piece of another world. Over time, Harris began visiting the infirmary. He didn't question her past, only her skill. One day, he left a package on the table, a small parcel wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a fresh bar of soap and a note for the nurse who remembers what clean means. She stared at the handwriting, neat and deliberate. It wasn't pity, it was respect. That night, while washing her hands, she saw her reflection in the metal basin, thinner, older, but still alive. Around her, the other women began to imitate her routine. some curious, others ashamed. They whispered about her kindness, her quietness, her strange friendship with the American officer. Lot, the proud secretary, still scowled when Hild passed, but even she no longer mocked. A few weeks later, the first letters arrived, intercepted mail, returned from the ruins of their homes. Ilse received a letter with no envelope, just words scribbled on the back of a ration slip. Her village was gone, no survivors. She broke down silently, clutching the soap Hild had given her days before. "It smells like something still living," she murmured. But peace in captivity was fragile. Rumors began to circulate that German prisoners were being sent east to face Soviet camps, that those who'd worked with Americans would be branded traitors. The tension crept in like frost. One evening, Hild overheard two guards speaking in English. She caught fragments, transport orders, women auxiliaries, some not coming back. Her pulse quickened. That night she asked Harris, quietly, what it meant. He didn't meet her eyes. "It's politics now," he said, "not mercy." For the first time, she saw the weariness behind his uniform. "You should keep your head down," he added softly, "and your hands clean." A few days later, a military truck arrived at the gate. New orders. Transfer to an unknown facility. The guards read out names. Hildith wasn't among them, but Greta's was. Ilse's too. They clung to each other before boarding. Greta smiled faintly. "Keep the soap," she whispered. "You'll need it more." When the trucks left, the camp felt emptier, colder. Hild walked to the infirmary alone, washed her hands, and stared at the bar until the foam dissolved. That night, she dreamed of home, of her mother's hands kneading bread, of sunlight through curtains, of laughter untainted by fear. And when she woke, she realized something cruel. She couldn't remember her mother's face clearly anymore, but she remembered that scent perfectly. Weeks passed. Spring began to edge through the wire fences. Birds returned. So did the sound of trains, faint but steady, moving west now, not east. One morning, Lieutenant Harris approached her again, eyes hollow. "The war's over," he said quietly. "Germany surrendered." The words didn't land as she thought they would. The women didn't cheer. Some wept. Others simply stared. Victory and defeat had lost their meaning long ago. That night, Harris gathered the remaining prisoners. "Soon you'll be free," he said. "But before you go, there's something you should know." He hesitated, then continued. "Back home, people talk about you, about what this war made of us, all of us, and what it took to stay human." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bar of soap wrapped in the same brown paper. "You think this means comfort, but it's not comfort. It's work. It's sacrifice. Do you know what it takes to make this during a war?" The women said nothing. Every drop of fat, every ounce of perfume was rationed, he said softly. American women saved grease from their kitchens, bacon, meat drippings, turned it in by the pound so we could make soap for soldiers and hospitals. They gave up their luxuries so others could stay clean, alive. He paused. "It's not arrogance, it's discipline and love." Silence filled the room. Hild felt her throat tighten. She imagined women she'd never met, strangers who had scrubbed and stirred and packed each bar with care. The scent wasn't luxury, it was memory. Humanity preserved in lie and patience. Later, when she returned to her bunk, She unwrapped the last sliver she had kept hidden. The fragrance filled the air once more, faint, fleeting, but pure. She pressed it between her palms and whispered, "Thank you." Outside, thunder rumbled, not of bombs, but of distant storms. The war was ending, yet something in her feared what came next. Freedom was a word she'd longed for, but now it felt uncertain, fragile. In the morning, the gates would open. The women would walk out, each carrying only what they could hold. But that night, Hilda couldn't sleep. The smell lingered, mingling with the cold air, as if trying to tell her something. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she wondered, what if she brought this scent home? What if, in a country drowning in ruin, one small bar of American soap could remind people what it meant to be human again? But before she could answer, a distant whistle cut through the night, sharp, urgent. Footsteps followed, shouting in English. She sat up. Through the slats of the window, she saw lights, trucks approaching fast, engines roaring. Something was happening. Something the officer hadn't told them, and Hilda, clutching the last fragment of soap in her hand, knew that whatever waited beyond those gates, it would change her life forever. The hands that made it across the ocean, far from the snow and silence of captivity, Cincinnati hummed with motion. The city never truly slept now. The war had seen to that. Factories glowed at midnight, trains howled through fog, and the scent of oil and soap mingled with coal smoke in the air. In one of those brick-walled buildings on the riverfront, a woman named Evelyn Clark wiped her hands on her apron and leaned against a steaming vat. She was 42, with lines carved by worry more than age, and her hair was tied back with a piece of red ribbon she'd worn every day since her husband left for France in '43. He'd written her once, from near Bastogne, then nothing. Around her, women moved like clockwork, measuring, pouring, stirring. Buckets of grease lined the floor collected from diners, schools, and homes all over Ohio. Housewives had been told, "Save your fat, makes bombs, it makes soap, it saves lives." And they did, bringing jars and tins of congealed white and yellow to collection points, proud to help in a war fought an ocean away. Evelyn knew every scent by heart, now the acrid sting of lye, the heavy sweetness of rendered tallow, the fleeting whisper of perfume when they added the final touch. It was work, dirty and constant, but when the bars came out smooth and pale, she always smiled. She thought of soldiers somewhere far off, scrubbing their faces with what she'd made. It gave the endless days a purpose. One afternoon, a government inspector visited the plant. A tall man in a brown coat. He shook hands briskly and reminded them how important their work was. "Our boys need hygiene," he said. "Clean hands save lives. And our prisoners, German or otherwise, they see our civility in small things." Evelyn paused. Prisoners. She'd never thought of it. "You mean, we send this overseas, even to them?" The man nodded. "It's not about sides, Mrs. Clark. It's about standards. Civilization doesn't stop at the battlefield." That night, she couldn't stop thinking of it. She imagined a woman like herself, only on the other side of the war. What would she think if she smelled this? Would she hate it or understand it? Days became months. The radio announced victory in Europe. The factory whistles blared, and people flooded the streets, weeping, laughing, hugging strangers. Evelyn didn't go out. She sat by the vat, staring into the swirl of cooling soap, and wondered where her husband had died, and whether he'd ever touched something she'd made. Then came a letter, not from him, but from the government. His name, his unit, missing, presumed dead. The paper trembled in her hands. Around her, the city celebrated, but she felt hollow. She folded the letter once, then tucked it under the mold trays, and the next morning she went back to work, because there were still bars to make, still hands that would hold them somewhere far away. Months later, the shipments changed. They were no longer stamped for U.S. Army supply. Now, they read post-war humanitarian aid, boxers bound for camps in Germany, Austria, Poland, refugee centers, rebuilding the world one crate at a time. Evelyn signed her name on one box in pencil, just her initial Z, C, because somehow it felt right that a piece of her should travel to. The factory windows were open that summer when she caught a faint breeze of perfume drifting through the steam. It was the same scent as always, clean, floral, almost hopeful, but for the first time she noticed the silence in it. The war was over, but peace hadn't quite arrived. It was like a held breath, waiting to exhale, somewhere across the ocean. That breath reached Hildmeyer in the camp. The Americans were packing up. Trucks groaned, tents collapsed, and the fences were coming down. The women had been told they would be sent home soon. Home, though, no one was sure what that word meant anymore. Hild sat on her bunk, hands folded around the last bar of soap she'd kept. The writing on the wrapper was fading, but she could still read the faint brand mark, ivory. She thought of the officer's words, of the women who made it, who saved scraps of fat while the world burned. She had begun to see the war differently now, not as a grand story of victory and defeat, but as 1,000 small choices, some cruel, some kind, that built its shape. Outside, the sound of laughter drifted in. Not American laughter this time, but German. A group of women washing their faces at the basin, water splashing under the sun. The scent filled the air again, carried on the wind like a memory that refused to fade. That evening, Lieutenant Harris called her to his office. "You'll be leaving tomorrow," he said. "A transport to Munich. From there, it's up to you." He hesitated, then added, "Germany's broken, Hild, but not everyone there will stay broken. Maybe people like you can remind them how to start again." She looked at him, trying to read the weight behind his calm tone. "And you?" "I'll go home," he said softly. "Back to a country that still believes it can fix what it breaks." They stood in silence. She wanted to thank him, to tell him he'd done more than keep her alive, that he'd given her something she didn't have a name for. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she handed him the small fragment of soap wrapped in cloth. "For your wife," she said. "Or whoever waits for you." He smiled faintly, though his eyes darkened. "She doesn't wait anymore," he said. Then he closed her hand back around the gift. "Keep it. It's yours." That night, Hild couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the distant rumble of trains. Somewhere beyond those tracks, her country was changing people, digging through ruins, lighting fires in bombed-out kitchens, trying to remember what normal smelled like at dawn. She stood by the gate, ready to leave. Her shoes were worn, her bag nearly empty. She reached into her pocket and touched the soap one last time. Then she noticed something odd, a small smudge on the wrapping she hadn't seen before. Faint letters, handwritten in pencil. WWII, she frowned, tracing the initials with her thumb. Someone's hand had written that someone who'd never met her, never imagined where this bar would end up. And yet, somehow, their lives had crossed. She felt a warmth rise in her chest, strange and steady. The truck horn sounded. The gate opened. The world beyond was still gray, still scarred, but the air smelled faintly of spring again. Hild stepped forward. Behind her, the camp receded, the fences disappearing into mist. Ahead lay miles of wreckage, hunger, and uncertainty. But in her coat pocket, the bar of soap pressed gently against her side, and its scent clean, persistent, impossible seemed to whisper that maybe, just maybe, civilization wasn't something you inherited. It was something you rebuilt. As the truck rolled toward the horizon, Hild turned once more, catching sight of a figure standing near the empty guard post, Lieutenant Harris. His hand raised in farewell. For a heartbeat, the world stood still. Then the engine roared, the road curved, and he vanished from view. But the scent remained, carried by the wind, reaching far beyond the camp, until it crossed the sea once more, back toward a factory in Cincinnati, where Evelyn Clark was washing her hands after another long day, never knowing that somewhere a woman who had once been her enemy now carried the fragrance of her hope. And far off, in the twilight between peace and ruin, something was waiting for both of them, something neither could yet see, but both had already begun to feel. The confession and the change. The train lurched forward, metal shrieking against metal as it crawled across a scarred landscape that barely resembled a country. Hild sat by the window, her face half reflected in the glass, watching the ruins of villages roll by like ghosts. Every station they passed looked the same: collapsed roofs, hollow-eyed people scavenging among debris, children holding out their hands for bread. Germany was no longer the empire she had served. It was a shadow of itself. The war had ended, but the silence it left behind felt heavier than the bombs ever had. She tightened her coat against the cold, her hand brushing the soap still tucked in her pocket. It had survived the journey so far, smooth, light, wrapped in its worn paper. Sometimes she wondered if it was the soap keeping her sane, the faint fragrance reminding her that not everything had turned to ashdod when the train stopped in Munich. She stepped down into chaos. Refugees swarmed the platform. Allied soldiers shouted orders, and posters fluttered on broken walls. Denazification begins. Report for registration. She hesitated. Former nurses like her weren't exactly welcomed with open arms. Too many, they were part of the machine that had swallowed their sons and brothers. For days, she wandered the city, sleeping in half-burned buildings, trading scraps of bread for warmth. Then, one afternoon, while searching for work, she saw a handwritten sign nailed to a doorway. Medical volunteers needed American Relief Unit. Her pulse quickened. Without thinking, she pushed open the door. Inside, the smell hit her instantly familiar, clean, and impossible to mistake. Soap, real soap. An American woman stood behind a table, sleeves rolled up, handing out medical kits. "You have medical training?" she asked when Hild approached. "Yes," Hild said quietly. "Nurse, field service." The woman studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We can use you. Name, Hildmeyer." That's how it began. Each morning, she reported to the relief station, helping wash and treat refugees, most of them Germans, some Poles, a few Russians. The Americans ran the place with brisk kindness, never cruel, never careless. She found herself working beside a woman named Margaret Blake, a Red Cross volunteer from Boston, who spoke in a quick, cheerful rhythm that almost disguised her exhaustion. They didn't talk much at first. Hild kept her head down, her German accent drawing stares she pretended not to see. But over time, Margaret began asking questions. Simple ones. Where were you during the war? Do you have family left? Hild answered cautiously. I was a nurse. In field hospitals. I don't know about my family. Margaret nodded, never prying. But one evening, as they scrubbed bandages in a basin, she said softly, "You know, I used to think I hated Germans." Hild froze. My husband died in France, Margaret continued. He was 27. I told myself I'd never forgive. But then I came here, and I saw this. She gestured toward the refugee line, thin, broken women with hollow eyes and shivering children. It's not what I imagined. Hate's a heavy thing to carry across an ocean. Hild didn't know what to say. For the first time in years, she felt her throat close with something other than fear. Weeks passed. They worked side by side, and a quiet rhythm formed between them. Margaret shared stories of America, of bright houses, fresh coffee, soap that smelled of lilac. Hild listened like someone hearing color for the first time. One morning, a shipment arrived, crates marked relief supplies, Cincinnati, Ohio. When Margaret opened one, the scent spilled out like sunlight. Bars of ivory soap, hundreds of them. Hild stared, breath catching. The same brand, the same wrapping, the same faint letters. Margaret laughed softly. You'd think the smell of soap couldn't make you cry, she said, wiping her eyes. That evening, as they sorted the supplies, Hildy finally asked, "Do you know who makes it?" Margaret shrugged. Factories. Women back home, mostly. My sister worked in one during the war. Said it was her way of fighting back. Hildy smiled faintly. Then your sister fought. Well, a few nights later, while cleaning the ward, Hild found Margaret sitting alone, holding a letter. Her eyes were red. Bad news? Hilda asked. Margaret shook her head slowly. No, just unfinished business. She handed her the letter. It's from Evelyn Clark. She worked in one of those factories. Says she used to write her initials on the bars, just to feel like she mattered. Hild's fingers trembled as she unfolded the paper. Near the bottom, the signature read EC. She stared at it, heart pounding. Margaret, she whispered. The soap. It has her initials. The one I carried. It came from her. Margaret blinked, confused. What do you mean? Hild reached into her pocket and unwrapped the last sliver. The paper was fragile now, creased from months of travel, but the faint pencil marks were still visible. E.C. Margaret's breath caught. You're serious? Yes, Hildy said softly. It found me. Across an ocean, through the war. I thought it was a gift from a soldier. But it was from her, from someone who never hated me, even when she had every reason to. They sat in silence, the room lit only by a lantern. Outside, rain began to fall, washing soot from the window pane. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Then Margaret whispered, maybe that's what we were fighting for, not power, not pride, just decency. Hildy nodded, eyes glistening. Clean hands, she murmured, even after everything. From that day, something shifted between them. They worked not as captor and captive, not as victor and vanquished, but as two women carrying the same invisible weight. Together, they cleaned wounds, delivered babies, and rebuilt fragments of humanity from the wreckage. One morning, Hild found a small envelope on her cot. Inside was a note in Margaret's careful handwriting. Evelyn Clark is visiting Europe next month with the Red Cross. I told her about you. Hild's pulse quickened. For days she couldn't focus, her mind replaying every step of her journey, the camp, the convoy, the smell of that first bar of soap. And now, the woman who'd made it was coming here. When Evelyn finally arrived, the camp gathered to greet the American delegation. She was older than Hild expected, with silver streaks in her hair and tired eyes that still carried warmth. When Hildy stepped forward, their gazes met, and something wordless passed between them, recognition without explanation. Hildy held out the sliver of soap, wrapped neatly in its paper. "This was yours," she said. Evelyn took it gently, tracing the faded initials. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she smiled faintly. "It was everyone's," she whispered. That was the point. The two women stood there, one who had made, one who had received, and between them lay the smallest thing, a bar of soap, and yet it carried the weight of a world that had almost destroyed itself as the day faded. Evelyn walked the camp with Margaret, speaking softly to the workers. Hild watched from the infirmary doorway, her heart heavy with something she couldn't name. Gratitude, perhaps, or grief. That night, when the camp lights dimmed and the air filled with the scent of soap and rain, Hild realized something. The Americans hadn't brought civilization to Germany. They had only reminded her of what civilization truly was. But as she lay down to sleep, a soldier rushed through the camp, shouting orders. The Red Cross convoy had been delayed. Some routes to the east were no longer safe. There were rumors of new unwrestled loyalties stirring again in the ruins. Hildy sat up, listening to the commotion, the echo of boots, the murmur of fear returning. She looked toward the dark horizon, and for the first time, she felt it, the scent of smoke rising once more. The war had ended, but peace was only beginning to fight for its life. The war ends, but the scent remains. The first scent of summer came not with flowers, but with smoke. Munich's streets were waking again, vendors calling out in broken voices, bicycles clattering over cobblestones, the faint hum of trams running where tanks once thundered. Yet beneath that noise there lingered a heaviness, as if every breath still carried the ghost of the war. Hildy walked through the marketplace that morning with a basket half empty and her ration card clutched tight. Fresh bread was still rare, soap rarer still. The Red Cross station had closed 2 weeks ago, and Margaret had returned home with Evelyn Clark. Their departure had left the camp strangely hollow. It was as if something gentle had been lifted away, and the silence that followed pressed hard against the chest. She paused by a makeshift stall where an old woman sold salvaged goods, a cracked mirror, a rusted pan, buttons, thread, and half-used bars of soap. Hild's eyes caught on one of them, its surface rough, gray, unscented. The woman smiled sadly. "Homemade," she said, "rendered from whatever fat's left. It cleans, if you don't mind the smell." Hild nodded and bought it anyway. She placed it beside the tiny sliver of ivory she still kept wrapped in cloth, a relic, a reminder. She couldn't bear to use it. It was too precious, too symbolic of everything she had lost and found again that evening. She returned to her small rented room in what had once been a bank clerk's flat. The wallpaper peeled, the window cracked, but it was hers. She heated water, washed her hands, and for the first time in days, she unwrapped the American soap. Its fragrance filled the air, again soft, sweet, impossibly clean. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't in the ruins. She was in light. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps. Hild froze. Visitors were rare in these times. When she opened the door, a man stood there tall, wearing a coat too fine for the rubble around him. His accent, when he spoke, was unmistakable. American, Hildmeyer. Yes, I was told you worked with the relief unit. I'm looking for a nurse. He hesitated, lowering his voice. Lieutenant Harris sent me. The sound of that name made her heart skip. Harris. The man nodded. He's in Berlin now. Reconstruction Division. He said if I ever found you, to give you this. He handed her a small envelope. Inside was a folded note, the paper smudged. The writing hurried but unmistakable. Hild, if you're reading this, then peace has taken me elsewhere. I wanted you to know that what you did here mattered. Civilization isn't built by armies, it's rebuilt by hands that still believe in decency after everything. I thought you might like to know something. The woman who made that soap, Evelyn Clark, has started something new, a foundation for rebuilding hospitals in Europe. She asked me to send you an invitation. If you're ready to start again, come to Berlin. Her hands trembled as she folded the paper. The man watched her carefully, then said, I can take you there if you wish. Tomorrow morning. Hild hesitated. She had no family, no home to return to, but Berlin. Berlin was a graveyard of what Germany once was, and yet somewhere deep inside, a faint warmth stirred. Perhaps it was time. The journey took 2 days. Along the way, she saw what the world rarely spoke of: the other Germany, the one beneath the ruins. Children bathing in rivers because the plumbing was gone. Farmers trading soap for bread. Women rebuilding walls with bare hands. The smell of life returning, faint and fragile, but there. When she arrived in Berlin, the city was unrecognizable. Streets she remembered from childhood were nothing but open wounds. Yet, amid the wreckage, a white tent stood by the Tiergarten, Red Cross banner fluttering above it. Inside, Evelyn Clark was there. She stood beside a table stacked with medical crates, her sleeves rolled up, her silver hair catching the sunlight. When she saw Hild, she smiled a real smile, full of warmth that reached the eyes. You came, Evelyn said softly. I had to, Hild replied. You called? Evelyn gestured to the tent. We're building again. Hospitals, clinics, even schools. But not just for Germans, for everyone left standing. Hildy looked around. There were Poles, Austrians, even Russians among the volunteers. Men and women who had once been enemies now passed water buckets, stitched bandages, washed linens. The air smelled of soap, American, yes, but also German-made now. Evelyn handed her a crate labeled donations from Cincinnati. We ship these every month, but now we'll teach your people how to make it themselves. No one should depend on kindness from afar forever. Civilization has to grow its own roots again. Hild touched the crate, tracing the stenciled letters. You still believe in us, she said quietly. Evelyn nodded. Because I've seen what happens when people stop believing. They worked together for weeks. And in that time, Hild learned more about Evelyn's story, her husband's death, the grief that turned into work, the faith that decency could outlast destruction. But one evening, as they sat by the tent sorting supplies, Evelyn grew quiet. "There's something I didn't tell you," she said. "When I first started this, there were people who said it was wrong, that the enemy didn't deserve our help. They said soap was too good for Germans." Hild looked at her, startled. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "I told them, civilization isn't something you ration. It's something you choose every day, even when it hurts." Hild swallowed hard. "And did they listen?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "Some did, some never will. But that's how it starts, one person at a time." That night, Hildy couldn't sleep. She walked outside, past the campfires and the broken skyline of Berlin. The city glowed faintly under the moon, quiet but alive. From somewhere behind her came the scent of soap, a Genjlin, defiant, human. And then she heard it, a distant rumble, faint but growing. Trucks, military, not allied this time. She turned toward the sound. Down the road, headlights appeared, moving fast, to organized, to silent. The air grew tense. A guard called out. No answer. Another shout, louder. The convoy didn't slow. Someone yelled for everyone to get down. Hild froze, the echo of the war roaring back through her veins. Evelyn ran from the tent, waving her arms. "They're ours. They're carrying supplies." But as the trucks drew closer, Hild saw it markings not of relief, but of a new insignia painted crudely over old Allied stars. She didn't recognize it. Neither did Evelyn. The first truck stopped, and a man stepped out, his face hard, his accent unmistakably German. "We are reclaiming what's ours," he said coldly. "The Americans may leave their soap, but this country belongs to us again." Shouts erupted. Soldiers scattered. The man's gaze landed on Hild's crate, though. One marked donations from Cincinnati. He kicked it over. Soap bars spilled across the dirt, shattering their clean silence. Evelyn stepped forward, trembling but steady. "These are for your people," she said. "Not theirs. Yours." The man sneered. "We don't need charity." The standoff hung in the air, brittle as glass. Then Hild stepped between them. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "You're wrong," she said. "We all need it. Every last one of us." The man hesitated, eyes flicking from her face to the broken soap at her feet. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then he turned sharply, barking orders, and the trucks began to move again, retreating into the shadows from which they came. When they were gone, the silence was deafening. Evelyn knelt, gathering the scattered bars with trembling hands. Hild helped her, neither speaking. One bar cracked in half. As Hild picked it up, she turned it over and saw something faint, half-erased by mud. The letters EC. She looked up, meeting Evelyn's eyes. The older woman smiled through tears. "Looks like one of mine survived the war after all." Hild placed it gently back in the crate. Around them, the fires flickered, the scent of soap still rising, refusing to die. But far off in the darkness, beyond the broken city, new voices were gathering, voices that spoke not of peace, but of pride and vengeance reborn. And Hild, standing in the middle of Berlin's ruins, with the smell of civilization clinging to her hands, knew one truth too well. The war might have ended, but the fight for humanity was only just beginning.